Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, fellow Nuffield scholars. Thank you for the introduction, Wallace. That saved 2 minutes off my presentation. Firstly, thank you to Nuffield Farming Scholarship Trust for providing me with this amazing opportunity and believing in me that I can actually get up here and do this after 2 years of life-changing study. To the Three Counties Agricultural Society, without whom this would not be possible, you have been fantastic sponsors. And to my family, for very politely responding with, "Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, great, I'm really proud," during all those phone calls home. Why did I choose to study soil? As an advisor in Herefordshire, it's probably 50-50 between the number of people who are really caring about their soil and assessing it on a regular basis and making informed decisions about how and when they disturb it and what they grow in it. But equally, scenes as you see on the screen, huge quantities of soil being washed out of field gateways and down into our rivers and streams. How do we have such a different opinion of soil on farms? Why is there not more concern when such a valuable, irreplaceable asset is lost in huge quantities? So, how do we change those stigmatisms? Is it through tighter regulation? Should we be providing more financial incentives? Or perhaps it's by improving our education and understanding of what soil does for our business. In Australia, the Soils for Life initiative promotes regenerative agricultural practice. They have a Prime Minister-appointed National Advocate for Soil Health. His role is to thread farming, and in particular soil, through multiple strands of governmental policy. If there is a wildfire, a flooding incident, a human health scare, or a food shortage, the chairman of Soils for Life is there to explain to the government and to the Australian public how farming and soil management can be the cause and solution to those challenges. Soils for Life identified leading farmers, farming champions across Australia and promote their practices to try and enthuse those who may follow suit. They have a fantastic mentoring program to try and pair up those people who would like to make a change with somebody who has already trodden that path, to try and avoid the following person having to stumble through the same potholes as those who have gone before them. Their approach is much more as a facilitator rather than an educator. Farmers do not need more people telling them how to farm. And through this role of facilitation, you can empower farmers as individuals to be proud of the work that they do and ensure that it is shared and enthuses others within the sector. Through a series of case studies and on-farm events, discussion groups, these leading practices are shared and promoted across what is really a vast country and ensures that good soil health can convince not only our hearts and minds, but also our wallets too. Would financial incentives be a useful mechanism when thinking about soil management? During my time in the States, I was hosted by the Watershed Agricultural Council in New York State. The rivers draining these lands provide the drinking water for 9 million New Yorkers. And unfortunately, the water quality was deteriorating. The New York Water Board were faced with a bill of potentially $10 billion to either correct the symptoms of that water quality, but rather they chose to invest that money back upstream with the farmers and with the landowners. Through the Watershed Agricultural Council, they provide advice and guidance and 100% grant funding for improvements in yards and with land management. It all sounds fairly rosy. However, there is also the opportunity to sell what they call easements, which is our effective right for planning permission. That might be quite appealing to an aging farming population in New York State, but it means for the next generation You might not be able to build further stock housing and expand your business because you have no easements left. This has resulted in quite a stifled agricultural community in small states of New York. The water company also have the biggest wallet when it comes to acquiring land. So if land becomes available, it is much more likely to be bought and reverted back to woodland to ensure that the water quality does not deteriorate further. So we have to be careful what we wish for. 100% grant funding sounds fabulous, but it doesn't often come without strings attached. And although it may engage an audience, it can also create a mindset of only doing something because you're being paid to do it. And if that funding stream were to dry up, old practices may reoccur. Rather, we should think of funding opportunities as a consequence, not a driver, and as a reward, not an incentive. Perhaps then regulation is the answer. Further south, in Maryland, as I was calling it until corrected, it's Maryland, is the Chesapeake Bay. It's a national treasure to the United States, and it's 2/3 the size of the UK, crossing 6 different states. Each state is set a limit for how much nutrient it is allowed to discharge into the Chesapeake, because as you can see in the image, there is a huge amount of nutrient enrichment, which has resulted in effectively a very large dead zone. Maryland in particular need to reduce their phosphate losses by 48%. In order to achieve this, farmers within the state have to submit soil test and nutrient management plans for inspection by the state. If a field is found to have too high a phosphate level, the farmer again has to submit a plan to ensure they're going to demonstrate how that will be run down. To date, 18% of the soil tests from fields submitted have been above those targeted levels of P. During my time in Chesapeake, the Chesapeake Bay Foundation introduced me to several farms where they've actually found very innovative solutions to this issue to ensure they can still get the benefit and utilize the nutrients of nitrogen in their slurry. They have managed to install phosphate stripping systems so that the phosphate can be stripped and sent out of state without compromising the rest of their business. So regulation, while a daunting prospect, can encourage quite innovative solutions which may make us much more resilient in the long term. But as we well know in the UK, regulations can be overly complicated. And is it no wonder when we have such diverse farm types? While I was in New Zealand, in the Lake Brunner catchment, I met with farmers who had had a much more interactive debate over new legislation. And the legislators had consulted and sought opinion on what form and role their regulators should take. This meant that the farmers in this catchment could take ownership of the issue, but much more importantly, take credit when those improvements were seen. The final chapter of my Nuffield studies was to focus on the barriers to change. Dr. Charlie Massey observed that farmers are quite adept at technological change, but less so at transformational change. And I'm sure as an individual you would agree, it's quite easy to take a paracetamol for a headache, but we don't often stop to think, what on earth caused the headache? Could I change my approach and how I operate on a daily basis to ensure that doesn't occur again? It's much easier just to take the tablet. There are many influences on us as an individual: traditions from family, peer pressure from neighbours. The photos on the screen are actually from Neil Dennis's farm in Saskatchewan, showing his field soil with a beautiful crumbly structure and his neighbour's field, which is set stocked. Neil didn't actually explain to me how little he got on with his neighbour until after we had taken that soil pit from next door. But again, that peer pressure of looking over a fence or a hedge will really influence how willing people are to change. Perhaps we have a dependence on an agricultural support industry who have too many vested interests. So we need to challenge the advice that we are given. And what of the next generation? How do we tempt our young farmers down off the shiny tractors to get their hands dirty in the soil, because technology is far sexier than spades. If we can therefore split farmers into 4 categories, the early adopters, those leading the way for farming, perhaps considered eccentric, perhaps mad by some neighbours, but I'm ever so glad to see so many of you here today. It is your role to enthuse the early majority who are much more likely to follow suit. If we can find ways of promoting the work that you all individually do to ensure people understand your approach and are enthused by it and given confidence to also have a go. Should we also try to engage the late majority and the laggards? A friend once observed to me, you can help someone if they're going in the right direction, even if they're going at a different pace to you. But if they're going in a different direction, they'll rip your bloody arm off when they pass. So farmer empowerment is key. You need to feel empowered that you can share the benefits of your approaches to soil. Farming systems can only be improved where they are and by whom they are farmed. Those who wish to change, I encourage to stand on the shoulders of giants, many of whom will be in the room today, willing to share their experiences. And remember that change does not occur on the short term. There is no magic bullet. And if you don't have a support system around you, it will feel like a very long and dusty road to travel on your own. In conclusion, facilitation is essential to ensure that farmers can share peer-to-peer and get a true cascade of enthusiasm from the work that they do. No single mechanism that I have studied today will achieve long-term positive change. Rather, we need a combination of approaches. The early adopters will feel the benefits of financial rewards of better soil management and improved soil health. Through knowledge transfer, they can encourage the early majority to follow suit. And perhaps then the role of regulation is to prop up the bottom half. And finally, we must remember that soil is not just for farmers. At such a pivotal time, we need to make sure the opportunity is taken to communicate with the government and the British public that our soil management will influence flooding, will provide food, will ensure the rivers are clean. We have to thread that as a common theme through multiple strands. It is not just deemed as agricultural. And finally, it turns out you do have to travel to the other side of the world to find paradise. But when you get there, there are Hereford cattle there too, so it feels quite a lot like home. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.